Good day and welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. We have been studying Acts, taking a long, thorough trip in order to try to understand the meaning the author intended for his reader. We left Paul last time, having returned from his third missionary journey to the Gentiles, from what today would be Greece and Turkey. He had landed at the port city of Caesarea, which was on the western coast of Palestine, and the administrative Roman headquarters for the region. He now plans to depart there for Jerusalem, by land route. There he plans to meet with the mother church of James and attend Pentecost services at the Jewish temple, the Herod's temple, second temple, if you will. Having been living in Gentile country and in intimate association with Gentiles, he will be required to go through the purification or cleansing rituals before entering the temple. Also, rumors of what he has been teaching to the diaspora Jews that have converted to Christianity have caused conflict within the Jewish community at large, including this church here at Jerusalem, the mother church, James's church. And those must be resolved while he's here. He has been warned that Jews will arrest him when he gets there, but he sees this as God's will for him to be there, and he's in obedience to God's will. Let's read this follow-up storyline in Acts 21, verses 15 through 26. After these days, he got ready and started to go up to Jerusalem. Some of the disciples from Caesarea also came along and brought us to the house of Nesmith of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we were to stay. When we arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers welcomed us warmly. The next day, Paul went with us to visit James, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through the ministry, or his ministry. When they heard it, they praised God. Then they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands of believers there are among the Jews, and they are all zealous for the law. They have been told about you, that you teach all the Jews living among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, and that you tell them not to circumcise their children or observe the customs." Some scriptures will read, "observe our cultures." What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. So do what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Join these men, go through the rites of purification with them, and pay for the shaving of their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself observe and guard the law. But as for the Gentiles who have become believers, we have sent a letter with our judgment, that they shall abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, having purified himself, he entered the temple with them, making public the completion of the days of purification when the sacrifice would be made for each of them. So these verses also that we just started reading also start the end of Acts. In other words, we've got, I think it's 6 more chapters to go in Acts, but the real end of that 6-chapter series starts right here. And of course, it also is kind of the end of Paul's missionary work. Even though it was not Paul's plan. But based on what happens here in the next 2 or 3 sessions, we'll see it essentially ends his missionary work, formal missionary work anyway. This trip would have been about 75 miles, this land trip from Caesarea to Jerusalem in those days, note most scholars. But it could, in this case, it seems like it may have involved 3 to 5 days. Few scholars touch on verse 15 and 16 in their commentaries. Very few. Except to suggest maybe that Luke is just providing some chronological details to smooth out the awkwardness to the shift that's going to start there in verse 17 and start the rest of the story, as we said. Scholars report that this Nason lives in a village about 2 days outside of Jerusalem. one or 2 days, I quote, 1 or 2 days away, end quote, reports Dr. Robert Wall in his commentary. Nason is probably taking risk in providing hospitality to Paul's party prior to his taking the ritual vow of cleansing. Nason was an early disciple, a believer, therefore assumed to be a Jew, and still remaining a practicing Jew like the rest, or most of the rest there at James's church. And the indication, of course, here is he's a Cypriot Jewish convert. He likely is very aware of Paul or Saul's persecution previously to Christians. Thus, he must have accepted Paul as a true convert and trust him, or assumes these are Nason's devout duties to be performed, regardless of the risk. Clearly, the writer here assumes his reader is aware of that early Christian conversion process on Pentecost and so forth. He doesn't mention it, but that's what he's talking about. And he's assumes that you understand that Paul went through a conversion step on the Damascus Road and thereafter. Dr. William Willimon, in his commentary, notes, as do some others, that verses 17 through 26 are very important, much more important, he says, than Christianity has basically assumed. Because, he said, they demonstrate clearly that Paul remains an orthodox and faithful Jew and practices the religion of the Israelites even after conversion. The author of Acts shows that Paul is accepted by the Jewish Christians in the mother church of James. These Christian Jews remain devout Jews and accepted Jesus is the Messiah. They followed the Mosaic law, as we learn in the book of Hebrews, which scholars today says much of that story, they believe, is representing the beliefs of the church there. Yes, they rejoice with all the good news Paul has to report on his missionary journey among Gentiles. But they have not been idle in teaching either. That is, teaching fellow Jews about Jesus and the Messiah. And they have thousands of converts to show. Of people, of Jewish converts to Christianity. converts to Christianity who remain acting and devout, faithful Jews to the historic Israelite religion, while clearly accepting that Jesus was the Messiah. There's nothing in the fundamental teachings, the rabbis tell me, in Judaism that prevents you from accepting that Jesus is the Messiah. That would not have been a violation. After all, several of them say there were many people who different Jewish sects believed were the Messiah. Scholars note the core of today's reading is about the concern or risk Paul's teachings have created or are creating related to whether Jews must practice the Torah law once they accept Jesus as the Messiah. Dr. Matthew Skinner and William Willimon make that clear in their commentaries and add, we modern Christians should not miss this point. Christians in general, they say, have historically not picked up on this or chose to ignore it. James's congregation seems to consist of mostly devout Jews, and they believe in Jesus as the Messiah and practice the Mosaic law, Torah law, if you will. They believe Jews are still required to do work of the laws to remain under grace. They are concerned with whether Jewish converts and the Gentile church are still practicing Mosaic law, and probably if the Gentiles are adopting the Mosaic law. Recognizing, as I've said very clear here, we sent our instructions that the Gentiles are relieved of certain of those Mosaic law duties. But nothing in that message excluded the Jewish convert. Recall from early chapters in Acts that it was James and the elders here who, in conference with the apostles, authorized Paul only to require some of the law to be held by Gentile converts. Most likely, they did not mean for such exemptions to apply to the diaspora Jews who converted. Also, those diaspora Jews referred to as Hellenized Jewish Christian converts, if you will. In other words, living like Greeks, but Jews ethnically. Why the concern is stressed there in verse 20. We have many thousands of Jews that are believers too, here in the Jerusalem area. Not just Gentiles. These Jewish Christians remain zealous to the Mosaic law. They have learned of your teachings and have major concerns. Especially this rumor that Paul has been teaching Jews living in Gentile lands, among the Gentiles, if you will, that they too can forsake the law, including not circumcising their children and observing our Christian culture. There is not, by the way, sufficient evidence, scholars say, that Paul directly taught such to Jews. I didn't find a scholar that didn't agree with that in my search. But more likely, somewhere in his audience had assumed that Gentile teaching may have applied to them. Of course, there's also those people who would stretch what was told for what they wanted to do. So the big question, it's on the table here. I mean, James's group puts it right on the table and lets it wiggle. What shall we do? What is to be done with this? I mean, this is an implication. This is serious stuff, causing major problems, and we have to do something about it. That is the time-sensitive question that's sitting right here in the middle of this reading. They develop a plan and order Paul to obey it. Well, Christians need to understand what they are actually doing here today in this process, says Dr. Skinner. First off, we need to understand Paul remained a devout Jew. Recall, he was from the Nazarite order of the Pharisees, the highest pious order. As did most of the apostles were not Pharisees, but they were Jews. All of them were Jews. And now they have spent much of their time living in Gentile lands. Thus, he or any other Jew of the time was required to be purified and cleansed before entering that second temple. It didn't have to be Paul. So part of this is not some sort of scheme to do something. Maybe the interpretation of it is, or the part where he's going to pay for these other people to have theirs done. As a Nazarite Jew, he would be taking the Nazarite qualification steps to remain in the Jewish temple. It appears here there were 4 others needing the same. So Paul is ordered to take these other men, along with himself, and take the purification rites, and for him to pay their expenses related to it, which would have involved some temple fees and the buying of a sacrificial, whatever was required for that. And usually what was required depended on how long you'd been in Gentile territory. So it could be quite expensive. Some suggest they were too poor, maybe, to afford what was going to be necessary. That may have been part of why they were waiting. James's group hoped that they, by doing this, will dispel the rumors about what you have been teaching. They will see that you yourself are living in obedience to the law by doing this, and this is the big one, requiring such of other Jews, which is what a Pharisee's job is. Obedience means for a Pharisee like Paul that you guard the law in the community and observe it to the letter. Paul does this the next day as planned. Then he goes to the temple, meaning Herod's temple, the main Jewish temple, and reports and starts his purification process. Well, there's purification steps before you enter the temple. Then you have to go in the temple and stay there in communion, I think for a week or something like that. And all that's a posted date or a published date to schedule then when your sacrifice will occur to the public. Such would have then allowed him and party to enter the temple services as a Jew on Pentecost along with other devout Jews. Short of that, he would have had to stay in the Gentile temple, the Gentile part, out of the main part of the temple. Scholars urge us not to miss that although the storyline in Acts had shifted to the Gentiles, James makes it clear of the great success there in the conversion of Jews of Judea to Christianity also. We don't pick up as much of that maybe as we should, because so much of Acts is about Paul. Dr. Eugene Boring, emeritus professor at Texas Christian University's Bright School of Divinity, and a disciples minister, longtime disciples minister, taught there are clearly 2 wings in the Christian faith at this time. These Judean Jews have great concern over these rumors of Paul's teaching. He suggests Luke here is writing to Theophilus, who, of course, the book of Luke tells us that, Acts being a continuation that he is still writing to Theophilus, trying to show him the church is working together to mutually resolve its differences within this Judeo-Christian movement. James, in his authoritarian move, has tried to resolve the problem and maintain the unity between those two wings. I hope this gives you some insight as to how some of the stronger scholars on this subject address it, and leave us with some thoughts to think about. Hope you have a good Bible study, and we'll catch you in another lesson.